Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel, our channel, the People's Channel. I am coming to you here on a cold but sunny, crispy Tuesday afternoon. And I am not even going to pretend that I am here for any reason other than to just kind of bitch with you guys in a public forum about something that's been really bothering me, but which I also think is A, like very bad for society as a social dynamic, and B, very relevant to the conversations that we're having on Just Getting Good, our podcast where I interview women over 50. So pour yourself a cup of tea, a glass of wine, crack a fresh crispy seltzer, and let's just sit down and bitch together if you have also been annoyed by these things. And before I jump into it, as always, we are primarily supported by you guys as a company, but also by a very small select group of financial companies that we work with and endorse, that we highly recommend you check out if you have been looking to improve your financial life, get a hold of your money. If you've been looking for a good budgeting app, I personally use and love Monarch. I check it 10 times a day. I'm obsessed with it. I found it independently when I was looking for something to replace Mint, and it is honestly a fucking awesome budgeting app. And if you use our link, you get 50% off your first year after the free trial. And yeah, I can't recommend it more. If you've been thinking about investing, we highly recommend Betterment. It is an app that makes investing basically totally painless. Anyone can do it. It makes it easy and accessible. And if you've been thinking about speaking with a financial advisor, we very strongly recommend advisor.com because they work on a transparent flat fee model that's the same for everyone, regardless of how much money you have. And you can set up a free call with them at the link below just to ask any questions you might have about either your situation and goals or just what a financial advisor even does and why you might want to work with one. So those three companies we love, we endorse. Let's get into what we're really here to talk about. So for those who have not seen, if you are not aware, there has been a bit of a trend I've been seeing it on TikTok because I primarily use TikTok, but I imagine if this is happening on TikTok, it is definitely also happening on Instagram Reels, because in my opinion, Instagram Reels is one of the darkest places on the internet. Some of the videos are fine, but some of those comment sections to me feel like the dark web. And if women are going through it on TikTok, they're definitely going through it on Instagram. Lord knows what's happening on Facebook. I can't even fathom that. But suffice to say, there has been kind of this trend of women, usually my fellow millennials, hate to see these divas down, posting their husband, usually their husband, sometimes it's a boyfriend or whatever male partner, engaging in some absolute loser behavior. It goes viral because people are like, ew, look at this loser. The comments are all like, he's a loser, leave him. And she immediately starts doubling down. That's my man. Don't come for him. You don't know us off of a 3-minute video, blah. To the point that this exact exchange of oh, let me guess, you post this, we're rightfully disgusted by it, and then you come in to defend him because we don't actually know him, has become kind of a meme of its own because we can anticipate the entire life cycle of these videos now. Because on the one hand, they are extremely compelling content. They range in sort of darkness from a guy just doing something very annoying but ultimately not catastrophic, like this video about a woman saying that her husband was supposed to watch the baby while she tries on clothes and the child is literally crawling into her dressing room. You also have this one where the woman asks her husband to soak a bag of beans and he just puts the entire bag with the plastic in a Tupperware of water, as if that was what she could have possibly meant. You have ones about, the husband's doing a special day once a year where he watches the kids for you while you stay in bed. You have the one that went super viral where the woman got her husband, I think an Xbox, and she asked, I think, for a butter bell, and he didn't even get her that. He got her a butter dish, which this is a total digression, but gifts for a woman that are literally just basic domestic supplies, vacuum cleaners, even things like stand mixers, whatever, if these serve the entire household, that's not a gift for her. I'm sorry, that's a total digression for me. But that can be one of the gifts if she really wants it, but there should be something that is just for her and her enjoyment. And I'm so sick of women's gifts defaulting to gifts that the entire household needs / benefits from. That's an epidemic, especially amongst boomers, I will say. How many people's moms were out here getting vacuum cleaners or washing machines for their holiday gifts or their birthday, barf. But anyway, you have that stuff. And then you have videos, I stitched one the other day where this woman, I guess she is a stay-at-home mother and her husband makes 100% of the income and seems quite controlling over it because she went out and bought a few things, and in this video, she's like on the verge of tears talking about how she needs to go store by store to return all of these items. And she's like humiliating herself in front of the internet because, as she puts it, like, he worked so hard and she was very impulsive and bought things they didn't need. And all I'm saying is, like, these videos range from this man is being either genuinely incompetent or in most cases, like, maliciously incompetent because he knows that he's making your life harder so that you won't ask him to do it again. All the way up to this feels like financial abuse to me. And at minimum, like, the dynamic that is playing out in front of a crowd of strangers versus between the two of you feels more like a cry for help than anything, because, like, I don't actually think when women are posting these videos and they're, so consistently going viral, that they don't understand on some level that, like, people will see this. People will react negatively to this, not necessarily negatively toward the woman, but toward the situation and toward the man. And so, yeah, there are times when it genuinely seems like, is this a cry for help? But even in videos like that, 9 times out of 10, including the one I was just talking about, if you go through the comments, she is absolutely doubling down on defending her husband and talking about how hard he works and how she, shouldn't be the one to go out and frivolously spend money, even though, in my opinion, she is an equal contributor to that home by raising their multiple children all day, every day, and taking care of the household. Suffice to say, though, this has become a subgenre of content, and there are, I think, a lot of nuances to this. And, like, the first layer of this is just deeply annoying, perhaps just to me personally, but I think to a lot of people, hence the comment about, like, let me guess, we don't know him and we're judging him off of, a snapshot. And what's mostly annoying to me about this is not even necessarily demonstrating this bad behavior, because I guess in the best of cases, you could say that this is, like, educational for other women to be like, don't be with someone who does this, or, like, don't be in a relationship where this seems acceptable or like the baseline. I guess you could say it almost has, like, a cautionary tale benefit. But what is so deeply annoying to me is that constant insistence of, like, well, you don't know us. He's actually great. He's this, that, and the other. And it's like, you're right. We don't know him. We don't want to know him. We didn't ask to meet him. We are not interested in him. You brought him to the internet to commiserate with everyone about this objective loser shit that he's doing. And now that we've confirmed it's loser shit, then you want to act as if we're somehow intruding on your life or over speculating on the relationship that you volunteered to tell us about. That to me I just find to be, again, very aggravating, very, like, pick a lane diva. You can't have it both ways. But also, to me, what it really speaks to, and what I find annoying on a more sort of societal level, and why I find this so toxic, is, like, what is playing out on social media when we exhibit men doing dumb shit that is clearly intentionally dumb, or in, again, worst cases, dangerous and scary. I want to say this. We have created a society, and I think there are ways in which it's getting better now, but I do think there are ways in which social media is essentially pulling us back into a way, way worse dynamic, where commiserating about bad men is a foundational aspect of women's community building, their social bonding, and their intimacy and trust. Essentially, you're supposed to be in on this joke or this sort of cultural narrative that, like, ugh, men are so this, or ugh, aren't all men that. And I want to acknowledge first and foremost that also in many ways applied to men and still does, right? Like, commiserating about, like, the ball and chain, how annoying your wife is, the nagging, the this, that, and the other. And that very much continues on to this day, especially in certain social circles and environments. It's worth noting that often the complaints from men are mostly just that the woman wants you to either participate more in the marriage/child rearing or wants to have more quality time with you. That's often the nature of these complaints, like, wow, my wife is so, like, blah, blah, blah. The women's complaints are often much more material, much more, he refuses to do this, he won't help me with that, he's not showing up for this, etc., etc. Even if we accept that this is a phenomenon that has historically existed for both genders in hetero partnerships, what is clearly different about our current era is that, like, historically, when this sort of, like, mutual contempt and complaining and this sort of, like, default framing that marriage is unpleasant or is taxing or that your spouse is draining or that they're not a helpful partner or any of these things, like, we can at least acknowledge that historically that existed in a context where marriage was like functionally not optional for most people, at least not most women. Like, again, as we love to remind people on this channel, like women couldn't even have their own credit cards, buy their own homes, like do all these things in all 50 states until like the late 1970s, right? So like, for many, many women on a purely functional financial level, there was no real option other than like stay indefinitely with your parents and by default your father as sort of like your keeper, or enter into marriage, which would then become sort of your keeper in a slightly different but no less patriarchal way. And by the way, as we always also like to remind people, like women were working historically with very rare exception. It's just that they mostly didn't get to keep their money. Their money went into the family, which was mostly controlled, at least in a long-term macro basis, by the man. The money belonged to him. The entire concept of joint assets, marital autonomy, both parties being equally entitled to money, even not necessarily money that they both earned in the case of things like spousal support and alimony, all of that. Like, these are relatively new developments. Like, up until very recently as well, it was extremely difficult to get divorced, even if you were in a very bad marriage. And that's already after you were sort of ushered into having to be married out of both social pressure and financial necessity. So like, marriage as an institution historically was never one based on like maximizing our joint sleigh and like we love each other so much and like our lives are so much better on aggregate as a twosome than as individuals. It was what you had to do, and once you were in that institution, it was essentially impossible to leave. In fact, a really good book about how divorce used to be, even just back in the 50s and 60s, is called The Divorcees. It's about like a divorce ranch, where this was a big thing back in that time, where like wealthy women would go to these ranches to establish residency in like Nevada, where it was legal, and then after a certain period of time they could actually get a divorce. But like prior to that, and that was like very rare and only for people who were socially and financially privileged enough to be able to do that. And even then it was like usually quite catastrophic for these women. Often they would lose their children. Often they would suffer like total social death and be completely ostracized. Like, this was not just like a chill thing that you were doing. Even when, in the rare instances when divorce could occur prior to very recent history, like it was not an easy thing to do. So I say all of that to say, if you think about the context in which men and women are complaining about their partners and bonding socially with their same gender over that contempt or over that, disappointment or disillusionment, it was in a context where marriage was so much less optional and so much more socially and materially enforced, even in cases where it was bad, even in cases where it was dangerous or abusive. For all of society's flaws today, we are not quite in that same situation. Women can and do control their own money. Not in every case, and there are many ways in which women abdicate this and in which they totally give not just all financial decision-making, but all financial control, all financial access over to the man in their relationship. They don't even know the passwords in some cases. It's not to say that there are not still many situations where it doesn't shake out in roughly the same dynamic as we had in like the early 1960s. But that is not, like, there are other options now, imperfect as they may be. And there are many women who are not opting into that, whether in the context of a marriage where they have their own financial protection and control, or in the context of not getting married at all, or at least not jointly combining all of your finances. So to see that same level of like, we as women, and I'm using women here because I am a woman, and so I'm more aware of this, from that perspective, like, to stay in that same dynamic of like, it is a bonding exercise to talk about how bad these men are, when it is no longer necessary in the same way it was to be in these bad marriages with these bad men, to me is almost creating an artificial social condition or social imperative to reinforce something that is no longer materially essential for these women. Like, we can have our own credit cards now, but we are sort of just normalizing the idea that marriage should be to some extent a drain on you or to some extent oppressive, so that even if you could go out on your own financially, we've normalized the idea of not doing it. We've normalized the idea of staying in these very toxic, unhealthy marriages. In ways big and small, right? Again, like, we're not always talking about someone who's in an outright dangerous situation. We're often talking about a woman who literally cannot even have her husband soak a bag of beans for her competently because he's just going to put the entire plastic bag full of beans into a Tupperware full of water. And I am so terribly sorry, but with all of the examples like that, especially as they pertain to household tasks and child rearing tasks, you will never ever fucking convince me that people who are doing that don't know exactly what they're doing. He is teaching that woman a very clear lesson, which is don't ask me to do this again because you won't get what you want. And she is then taking that lesson and putting it out to millions of people on social media, mostly other women, and essentially turning it into a joke, turning it into an eye roll, turning it into a moment of commiseration, turning it into like, oh, men, am I right? That to me, I believe, now that we have, again, imperfect as it may be, made very real financial legal gains about what rights women have to opt in or out of marriage as it benefits them, we have an ethical social responsibility when someone is trying to make that into a joke or a moment of bonding or just what marriage is, to point out that no, that is what a bad marriage is, or that is at minimum bad behavior. That is not normal. That is not something that we should all be tolerating or be happy with or accept as part of the deal. The constant cycle of posting this bad behavior, seeing people react to it, in my opinion, quite rightfully by saying, this behavior is really fucked up, you shouldn't tolerate it, up to and including sometimes the commentary being basically, you should leave this man, which I think is often the case in these situations, especially if this is prolonged, repeated behavior that is in no way improving, or even understood as bad behavior, that the response is almost universally such defensiveness and such backtracking. To me, again, that is the most frustrating part, because things may not be perfect, but we have a responsibility to, at minimum, call things what they are, name behavior for what it is. And something, that we talk about, as I've mentioned on Just Getting Good, people have complained a lot that too many of the women on that show are divorced or have never been married, or that we are sort of too down on the institution of marriage. I don't know how many times and ways I can say this. The women that appear on the show, like, to some extent are a self-selecting group. Like, we reach out to some women reach out to us, but there are all different factors for who actually ends up making it on the show. Some of it's purely scheduling. Some of it's like, if it's a redundant topic or something we, already have something we've already done very similarly this season, or whatever the case may be. But like, it is a group that we don't get to just randomly pick and choose. We want this woman with these exact criteria, and she must also be in a happy, long-term heterosexual marriage. Like, it's not an a la carte menu. We speak to the women that we are able to speak to, and we take those conversations for what they are. As I've also said, I don't necessarily believe that one person being in a very happy, functional relationship means that they have all that much advice to give to other random people about their relationships, because I believe that every partnership is completely unique, and what works for one partner or for one partnership will not necessarily work for another partnership. So I actually think that primarily focusing the advice and the life lessons on things that apply to the individual are actually much more applicable, including to people who are in happy marriages. Because just because you are in a happy marriage today does not mean that that is how you will live the rest of your life. Even leaving divorce aside, something can happen to your spouse. Something can happen to you. People change, life changes, people die. Like, we have to be prepared to function, especially financially. We have to be prepared to function on our own if need be. So that information about building a life that is solvent and sustainable for one person, again, that applies even to people in marriage. And I would argue, especially to people who might be in not great marriages. Because the most frequent reason why people don't leave bad situations that they know are bad and want to leave is because it's not financially feasible. And that is not something that happens overnight. Getting to that position where you are no longer able to leave, even just literally physically leave and go get a hotel room somewhere, that is an accumulation of many years of changes, of pressures, of potentially abuse, of decisions, of combining, of cutting yourself off of certain information, of, not having certain resources. Like, these things accumulate until you reach a time almost that sneaks up on you where you don't have options. So the message for women at all ages, at all stages of life, to always ensure that they at least have the minimal amount of protection, that if they need to escape a dangerous situation, for example, they can, or like if something happens to their spouse, they can pay all the bills and open all the accounts. Like, that applies to everyone. But I also think that, like, at least for me and what content we are putting out into the world and what lessons we are trying to impart with this channel and facilitate with this channel is like, I am a happily married woman. Marriage has worked out very well for me. I also happen to meet a man that I love and who has been a truly wonderful equal partner for my whole life when I was 22 years old. So like, I got very, 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 very lucky in that regard. I don't necessarily know that that gives me a ton of wisdom to impart about what makes a marriage successful. I can say what makes my marriage successful, but mine is very different than yours, and as it should be. But I am not here to dismiss the institution of marriage or insinuate that it can't be a good thing or make life better. It can, it does in mine. But that only works if both parties are coming to it as willing, free individuals and equals who are participating actively in the relationship because it is additive to their life, not out of obligation, not out of social or material enforcement. If either of us at any point were to not treat the other person with respect, with care, with honesty, with all of these things, like, we could opt out. And again, that is a freedom that women only pretty recently even have. And that means that it is always an opting in for an additive situation. What makes a relationship additive to you will totally vary, but it is up to you to decide that your partner is, as Sophia said in our last episode of Just Getting Good, is a propeller, not an anchor. And these marriages that we are constantly essentially fielding as viral, eye-rolling content on social media, as memeable content, all that does is show us what marriage looks like when a partner is an anchor. And all it does is turn that into a joke rather than the dire situation that it actually is. I also want to say, because I can feel these comments brewing and I want to head them off, I don't have children. I will never have children as far as I'm aware. I guess life is long and you never know, but like, suffice to say, unless circumstances occur to bring children into my life in a way that I don't anticipate, I don't think I ever will. And I certainly don't have them now. So I can't say what a relationship looks like in the context of having children. And I'm not here to pretend that my experience in a dual income, no kid, long-term marriage is the same thing, or long-term relationship is the same thing as, you know, a dual or even single income with children. I know that that comes with different pressures, different outside stressors, different, habits and routines and dynamics that work for couples that may not work, that may not be necessary for couples that don't have that added element to them. That being said, I often think that the parent aspect of this, the having children aspect of this, is used as essentially a get out of jail free card for what ultimately amounts to the man not being a 50-50 partner in raising the children, both in terms of domestic labor and the actual day-to-day act of child rearing. We can fight all we want, but the stats don't lie. Please read Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. The numbers are very clear. When you think about all of the day-to-day work that goes into raising a child, whether that's, packing their lunch, knowing their teachers' names, making their doctor's appointments, facilitating their social lives, their extracurricular activities, all of this, overwhelmingly that falls to the woman. And often what you see in these videos is men essentially making them doing child rearing or them doing domestic tasks into such a difficult or frustrating thing that they're never asked to do it again. A good example, I am trying on clothes for my wardrobe. My husband said he would watch our crawling baby for 10 minutes while I try these clothes on, and here's a funny video of that baby crawling into my dressing room. What have we learned here? What have we learned here? That she doesn't even get 10 minutes to try on some pants. That's what we've learned. But if you look in the comments for videos like that, you will see this very sort of, well, it's nuanced and kids and this and that and the other. I think that we need to be a lot more honest with ourselves as a society about what an actual 50-50 partnership genuinely looks like versus what we have sort of been trained to gaslight ourselves into thinking it looks like. One thing they've studied is that men who do far less than half of the domestic and child rearing tasks perceive themselves as doing 50%. They perceive themselves as being a 50-50 partner. And as we've discussed before on the channel, our society loves nothing more than celebrating and congratulating a man for doing things that are his basic responsibility as a parent or even as a spouse. We love acting like it's not only some, major green flag that he's a good guy because he's, raising his children, but also insinuating that he's helping her raise that child and not equally fucking responsible for being a parent. That to me, and the fact that it is so often a cop-out / scapegoat for what it truly means to be a 50-50 partner. Again, I can't speak from firsthand experience, and maybe there's something I'm missing here. Maybe if you have children, it doesn't bother you as much to see this stuff normalized. But from the outside looking in, that shit is crazy to me. The video where the woman talks about how, like, for her birthday every year, her husband watches the kids so that she can stay in bed. He watches his own fucking children as a birthday gift? Like, I'm not saying my friends are perfect, but like, I don't fucking know a single woman who doesn't have that at least once a week. Like, I know multiple couples where they like literally switch off weekend days so that each partner can get a nice chill weekend day while the other one takes care of the kids. Like, we have lost the plot so dramatically on what we consider to be acceptable behavior. And again, like, historically, has partnership been 50-50 in hetero couples? Absolutely not. Are we way further along than we used to be? For sure. Are we still miles away from truly 50-50? Yes. But what is the big difference between now and 50 years ago is that we don't have to do this shit. We don't have to normalize this. We do not have to accept it as a baseline or accept it as something that women laugh about over a glass of wine, or, acts as like a fundamental act of bonding, is like bonding over our men's shitty behavior. Like, something to ask yourself is like, how often are the women in my life complaining about behavior like this on the part of their spouse? And what is the response when they do? What is the response? Because I really do think that we may never be able to totally eradicate this phenomenon of like showing off your husband's loser behavior. That may never fully go away. But what we can all change, and what I do think is starting to change when you look at the response on some of these videos, is we can stop normalizing it. We can stop nodding and laughing at the idea that this is just part of the deal. We can stop using children being a lot of work or, a chaotic element in the day-to-day dynamic or whatever as an excuse for nowhere even close to 50-50 behavior. We can stop papering over what is so obviously weaponized incompetence. We can stop framing what is so obviously just being the literal other fucking parent as helping your wife raise your own children. I'm just gonna close by saying this. We talk all the time about how the studies show that women get happier after divorce. Now, part of that is just because 70% of divorces are initiated by women. So usually they're getting out of a situation that is less beneficial to them, that they more acutely want to leave. But a lot of it is this. A lot of it is the fact that they have been operating for God knows how long on a totally false premise that this is a 50-50 partnership or even something that comes together to be greater than the sum of its parts. And only once their house is actually empty for certain days of the week or certain days of the month that they actually get to not do this all day. That they actually realize the extent to which they had been doing the work of two while gaslighting themselves into feeling like it was a shared responsibility. That happens time and time again. It's like, you actually get a day off now because he actually has to figure it out. He actually has to pack the lunches, actually has to clean the home. He actually has to bring everyone to their appointments or their school, or to talk to the teacher or the doctor or whoever. Like, it is actually not her responsibility. Fraught as it may be, imperfect as the custody system and child support system and all of that are, and as unfair as this often shakes out to be, nonetheless, we can't save everyone, but we can try to hold out a hand for each other and say, Diva, this isn't normal, and we don't have to do this anymore. Stand up, stop complaining about your loser husbands and then defending them over and over to the general internet public, and start doing something about it. Everyone get a prenup. Love you guys.